Hey there, and welcome to Mama Drama and Trauma. I'm your host, Jenny Kimmel, and as we're beginning this new year, I want to have a really honest conversation. Not polished, not perfect, just real. Because the start of a new year can hold a lot for people. For some, it feels hopeful. For others, it feels heavy. And for many, it feels like a quiet mix of both. There's something about the beginning of a new year that makes us pause, whether we want to or not. It naturally invites reflection. It asks us to look back at what we've lived through and forward at what we're carrying with us. And I want to be really clear right out of the gate. This conversation isn't about resolutions. It's not about fixing yourself. It's not about becoming someone new just because the calendar changed. This is about intention. This is about choosing yourself. And this is about starting the year in a way that actually honors where you've been. As you're listening to this, we've officially stepped into a brand new year. And for me personally, we've also just crossed something meaningful. On New Year's Eve, I celebrated my 49th birthday. Yep, my last year in my 40s. And that milestone has me thinking deeply about how I want to live this year, how I want to show up for myself, and what I'm no longer willing to leave behind, especially me. So today, I want to talk about living with intention, choosing yourself without guilt, and what it means to finally include yourself in the care you've always given everyone else. Why this time of the year hits different. There's something about the start of a new year that strips away the noise, the distractions quiet down, the routines pause, and suddenly there's space. Space we don't always know what to do with. We start looking back. We start counting. We start realizing just how much we've lived through. And for people who've experienced betrayal, loss, grief, divorce, trauma, or long seasons of survival, this time of year doesn't always feel celebratory. Sometimes it feels heavy. It can bring thoughts like, how did I get here? Why did this happen? Why did it take so much out of me? And then layered on top of that is this message everywhere you look, new year, new you. And I just want to say this clearly, especially as we start this new year. You don't need a new you. You've already lived enough to earn compassion, not pressure. I don't know about you, but I've never been great at New Year's resolutions. They usually sound good in December and feel like a failure by February because resolutions tend to focus on changing the outside, my body, my habits, my productivity, my appearance. But what I've learned, especially through divorce, heartbreak, and healing, is this. When the inside isn't healed, no outside change ever feels like enough. And that realization didn't come quickly for me. It came after years of pushing through, holding it together, and telling myself I just needed to try harder. So instead of resolutions, I love the idea of choosing one word that becomes your anchor, one word that guides your decisions, one word that reminds you who you are becoming, not who you're trying to fix. This isn't about perfection. It's about intention. And that difference matters more than people realize because resolutions often come from pressure. From comparison, from expectation, from the belief that who you are right now isn't enough. But intention comes from compassion, from awareness, from honesty. When you've lived through hard things, the kind of things that change you, the idea of starting over doesn't feel exciting. It feels exhausting. And maybe this year doesn't need you to reinvent yourself. Maybe it just needs you to come home to yourself. Turning 49 and seeing my life clearly. Turning 49 has done something to me, not in a dramatic, panic kind of way, but in a quiet, grounding, clarifying way. Because when you reach a certain point in life, especially after everything you've lived through, you stop looking at age as just a number. And you start looking at it as perspective. You start seeing patterns. You start seeing cycles. You start seeing yourself more clearly than you ever have before. And when I look back over my life, truly look back, I see a woman who spent decades caring for everyone else. I made sure people were okay. I made sure things ran smoothly. I held it together. I showed up. I loved deeply. I gave generously. I carried emotional weight that wasn't always mine to carry. And I don't say that with resentment. I say it with honesty, because for a long time, that was my identity. That was how I measured my worth. That was how I showed love. But it took me 49 years to realize something that feels so obvious now, but wasn't then. I needed to be included in that care too. And when that realization finally landed, it didn't come with anger. It came with sadness first. Sadness for how long I'd gone without asking myself what I needed. Sadness for how often I'd poured from an empty cup. Sadness for how natural it felt to put myself last. I deserved the same empathy, the same patience, the same understanding, the same love. And when I say I deserve that, I'm talking about from myself. That distinction matters because for most of my life, I didn't lack love for others. I lacked permission to give it inward. I didn't know how to slow down and ask, how am I really doing? I didn't know how to sit with my own discomfort without pushing it away. I didn't know how to extend grace to myself the way I so freely extended it to everyone else. And here's the part that feels important to say out loud. None of this makes me weak. None of this makes me foolish. None of this means I failed. It means I was surviving. It means I was coping the only way I knew how. It means I was doing the best I could with what I had at the time. And now, at 49, I know more. I know that self-care isn't selfish. I know that self-compassion isn't indulgent. I know that choosing myself doesn't mean abandoning others. It means finally standing alongside of myself instead of standing last. This birthday doesn't feel like something I need to fear. It feels like a quiet turning point, a moment where I can say, honestly, I've lived. I've learned, I've lost, I've loved, and I'm still here. And as I step into this last year of my 40s, I'm not trying to become someone new. I'm becoming more me, more honest, more grounded, more aware, more intentional. And that awareness alone has changed how I'm stepping into this year. Not with pressure, but with care. Betrayal, loss, and what they taught me. Living through betrayal broke me open in ways I never expected. And that is something my life has taught me. Because betrayal doesn't just hurt, it dismantles. It pulls the rug out from under everything you thought was solid. It makes you question your judgment, your memories, your instincts, and sometimes even your worth. Losing my dad changed me at a core level. There's a kind of grief that doesn't just make you sad, it rearranges you. It makes you see time differently. It makes you understand how fragile everything really is. Divorce reshaped my identity. It wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the loss of a future I thought I was building. The loss of the family structure I believed in. The loss of the version of myself I had been for decades. And all the other hard things I've lived through, the quiet disappointments, the moments no one saw, the nights I cried alone, the days I showed up anyway. They've all left their mark. But here's what I can see now with clarity I didn't have back then. Every single one of those experiences stripped away illusions. They stripped away the idea that love should hurt. They stripped away the belief that endurance equals loyalty. They stripped away the story that being chosen means being valued. They showed me what I will no longer tolerate, what I deeply value, what kind of life I want to live, who I want to be moving forward. And those realizations didn't come all at once. They came slowly, sometimes painfully, sometimes quietly, sometimes in moments where I didn't even realize I was changing. They taught me that love should not cost you yourself. They taught me that peace is more valuable than being chosen. They taught me that stability matters more than intensity. They taught me that safety matters more than appearance. And maybe most importantly, they taught me that I don't want to live the rest of my life in survival mode, because survival mode keeps you bracing. It keeps you waiting for the next hit. It keeps you hyper vigilant and exhausted. It convinces you that rest is dangerous and calm is temporary. And I lived there for a long time. But these experiences, as brutal as they were, also gave me something I didn't have before: clarity. I know what doesn't feel right now. I know when something costs me my peace. I know when I'm starting to abandon myself again. And that awareness didn't come from books or quotes or podcasts. It came from lived experience, from being brought to my knees and learning how to stand back up differently. I don't wish betrayal or loss on anyone. I don't romanticize pain, but I also won't deny this truth. Those experiences made me stronger, not harder, not colder, but clearer. Clear about what I deserve, clear about what I want, clear about how I want to feel in my own life. They help me understand that choosing myself isn't selfish. It's self-respect. And that clarity is what I'm carrying forward. Not bitterness, not resentment, but wisdom. Living this last year of my 40s differently. So as I step into my last year in my 40s, I'm doing it differently. And that decision didn't come from a place of rebellion or bitterness. It came from clarity. It came from finally understanding that I don't want to rush through the rest of my life trying to prove my worth, justify my needs, or explain why I deserve peace. I'm not chasing. I'm not proving. I'm not abandoning myself to make others comfortable. And for someone like me, that alone is a big shift, because for most of my life, I believed that being good meant being accommodating, that being loving meant being self-sacrificing, that being strong meant being silent. So choosing myself now doesn't feel loud. It feels unfamiliar. I'm living with intention, and intention shows up in the quiet moments, not the highlight reel. That means I pause instead of push. I listen to my body when it tightens or shuts down. I protect my peace even when it disappoints people. I choose what feels aligned, not what looks good on the outside. I stop over-explaining my needs like they require permission, and that hasn't come easily. Choosing yourself after a lifetime of choosing everyone else can feel uncomfortable. It can feel selfish. It can feel wrong. Sometimes it even feels like you're doing something bad, especially if people are used to you always saying yes. But it's not wrong. It's necessary, because when you finally include yourself in your own care, everything shifts. You start noticing how often you ignored your own exhaustion, how quickly you minimized your own feelings, how naturally you extended grace outward but withheld it inward. Living this last year of my 40s differently means I'm no longer willing to abandon myself just to keep the peace. I'm learning that peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from alignment. It comes from honesty. It comes from listening to what my body and heart have been trying to say for years. And this year isn't about perfection. It's about presence. It's about asking myself, what do I actually need right now? What feels safe? What feels steady? And then honoring the answer, even when it's inconvenient. I'm not trying to rewrite my past. I'm not trying to rush into the future. I'm standing right here in this season, at this age, and choosing to live it awake. And that to me feels like the most honest way to step forward. You don't need resolutions, you need intention. I want to say this again because repetition matters when you're trying to undo years of conditioning. You don't need resolutions. You don't need a list of ways to fix yourself. You don't need to become someone else. You just need intention. And intention feels very different from pressure. Pressure says, try harder, do more, be better, catch up. But intention says, listen, slow down, notice, honor. Intention doesn't demand that you overhaul your life overnight. It doesn't shame you for where you are. It doesn't punish you for being human. It simply asks you to pay attention. Intention asks, how do I want to feel? What do I need? What am I done tolerating? What actually brings me peace? For me, my word this year is peace. And peace in practice looks like choosing calm over chaos, safety over confusion, clarity over chasing. It looks like recognizing when something feels off and trusting that feeling instead of talking myself out of it. It looks like not forcing connections that require me to shrink, explain, or betray myself just to keep things smooth. And for you, your word might be something entirely different. It might be rest, or gentleness, or grounded, or trust, or enough. Whatever it is, let it come from self-honoring, not self-criticism. Because intention isn't about fixing flaws. It's about supporting healing. And here's something I want to say clearly, especially for anyone who struggles with follow-through or consistency. Intention is not a contract. It's not a rule. It's not something you fail at. You don't lose your word because you have a hard day. You don't lose your intention because you get triggered. You don't start over from scratch every time you struggle. You simply come back. That's the practice. You come back to your word when you feel overwhelmed. You come back to it when you feel unsure. You come back to it when old patterns show up, and slowly, often without you even realizing it, you start responding differently. You pause instead of react. You rest instead of push. You choose yourself instead of abandoning yourself. That's growth. And it doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like leaving earlier. Sometimes it looks like saying no. Sometimes it looks like choosing quiet instead of chaos. Sometimes it looks like doing nothing at all and letting that be enough. This year doesn't need to be about proving anything. It doesn't need to be about catching up. It doesn't need to be about becoming impressive. It can be about becoming aligned. Aligned with your body, aligned with your values, aligned with what actually feels good to live inside of. And if all you do this year is move a little closer to your intention, a little further away from what drains you, and a little deeper into yourself, that counts. That matters. That's not a small thing. That's a meaningful life shift. A message for anyone who feels late. If you're listening to this and thinking, It took her 49 years. How long will it take me? Let me say this clearly, and I want you to really hear it, not just listen to it. You're not late. You're not behind. You didn't miss your chance. Those thoughts, the ones that tell you you should be further along, more healed, more confident, more put together by now, they're not truth. They're pressure. And most of the time, they're learned. We live in a world that constantly measures progress by timelines, by milestones, by comparison. But healing doesn't work like that. You lived, you learned, you survived, and that matters more than any arbitrary deadline ever could. Every year you spent coping, enduring, holding things together, or simply making it through, that wasn't wasted time. That was your nervous system doing what it needed to do to keep you safe. And now you get to choose differently. Not because you failed before, but because you know more now. I never thought this is where I would be living the last year of my 40s. This isn't the life I pictured, but I can honestly say I'm glad I'm here. I'm glad I'm living this life with awareness, intention, and truth instead of denial or survival. Healing doesn't run on a timeline, growth doesn't have a deadline, and self-compassion isn't something you earn after suffering enough. You don't age out of becoming who you are. You don't expire emotionally. You don't lose your worth because it took time. You get to start including yourself now at whatever age you are, exactly where you are. And you don't need permission to do that. You don't need to justify why you're tired. You don't need to explain why you're choosing peace. You don't need to defend why you're slowing down. There is nothing wrong with arriving at yourself later in life. In fact, sometimes that's when the arrival is the most honest. Because by now, you've learned what doesn't work. You've learned what hurts. You've learned what costs too much, and that wisdom matters. So if today feels tender, if this new year feels uncertain, if you're carrying both hope and fear at the same time, that doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you're human. It means you're aware. It means you're waking up to yourself. And that, no matter when it happens, is always right on time. As we officially step into a brand new year, I want to invite you to pause with me for just a moment. Take a breath, drop your shoulders, let your body settle where you are. This is a new year, and whether it feels hopeful, heavy, quiet, emotional, or somewhere in between, you don't need to judge it. You don't need to rush it. You don't need to show up any certain way. I just want to say this clearly as we begin this year together. Make sure you are living your life in a way that actually makes you happy this year. Not the version of happy that pleases everyone else. Not the version that looks good on the outside, but the one that feels steady, honest, and right inside your body. Choose your word. Choose it gently. And when things feel overwhelming, when you're doubting yourself, when old patterns show up, when life feels loud, fall back on it. Let it ground you. Let it guide you. Let it remind you of how you want to feel, not who you think you need to be. This year doesn't need to be about fixing yourself. It can be about trusting yourself, honoring yourself, and finally including yourself in your own care. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to do one small thing. Take a moment today to name your word for this year, even if it's just quietly to yourself. And if it feels right, share it. Leave it in the comments, write it down, text it to someone you trust. Because when we name our intention, it becomes something we can return to. As you move through this first day of the year, I hope you do it gently. I hope you give yourself grace, and I hope this year meets you with peace, clarity, healing, and moments of quiet joy. And as always, you are strong, you are worthy, and your story matters. Until next time, take care of you.